With the beginning of the Great War, Imperial Russia realized how vulnerable St. Petersburg was to the large German high seas fleet. It simply could not match the German fleet in size to protect its capital city. To help offset this handicap, it dedicated itself to laying thousands of mines in the Baltic. Germany responded in kind. One of the ships the Russians built to do this was the 640-ton Voin, which was started in 1916 and completed in 1918, and was capable of carrying a then impressive number of mines. As the Russian Empire collapsed and fragmented, Voin found itself in the new nation of Finland. There it was taken over and renamed M1. Throughout the 20s and 30s, it was mostly used as a training ship and eventually as a tender for Finland's small submarine fleet. In 1936, it was again renamed, this time as Louhi. When the Winter War started, despite others being under construction, Louhi was the most capable mine layer in the Finnish Navy. From a Navy perspective, the Winter War was a mine war. Both Finland and the Soviets laid minefields between Estonia and Finland to check each other's movements. Though not completely successful, it was arguably effective enough to give many sailors on both sides many sleepless nights. This was exacerbated by the size of both navies. Finland just had a small navy, period, full stop. The Soviet Baltic Fleet, its main fleet, on the other hand, was theoretically larger, with 2 battleships, a medium cruiser, not heavy or light, 20-ish destroyers, and 50-ish submarines. This doesn't tell the whole story, though. In reality, the Soviet Navy's actual readiness rates were abysmal. There were exceptions, of course, but by and large, the brochure didn't match the test drive. And then there was the ice. It was called the Winter War for a reason. The winter of 1939-40 was one of, if not the coldest of the 20th century in that area. The war lasted from basically December to March. Once about mid-January hit, everything was frozen and basically only icebreakers could go to sea, if even them. At any rate, by nature, it was mostly a land war, so rightfully, that's where the focus was. Of the approximately 1,400 mines laid by the Finnish Navy in the Winter War, not counting the air-dropped ones, about 500 of them were laid by Louhi, so about a third. From October, everyone could see what was coming, to late December 1939. Arguably, this made her the main ship of the Finnish Navy. After the Winter War, the lessons learned were studied and acted upon by both sides. Clearly, it had just been round 1, and now everyone was regrouping during halftime. When the continuation war started, it was basically the same game, but bigger. The Soviets, for their part, had started to push through many reforms. Here, the Navy was both helped and hindered by being the proverbial stepchild branch. It was hindered by not receiving as much material support as it could have used. It was helped, though, because, first and most critically, nobody cares what the stepchild does. This means the Navy was free to make whatever operational reforms it wanted without much political interference. As a result, when Barbarossa began in June 1941, the Navy was the only branch on alert. The second advantage was that being so mismanaged, literally any improvement was a big one. On the Finnish side, they got serious about rearmament. Neutrality was no longer an option. Part of this rearmament was signing a pact with Germany. They simply couldn't count on the Western Allies, so they started getting the support they could afford from someone willing to sell it to them. Not just that, but in having a common enemy, they cooperated and coordinated more closely, effectively multiplying what the small Finnish Navy could accomplish on its own. When the continuation war started, this paid compound dividends for the Finnish Navy. It was still realistically too small to do much on its own, but now it was working hand in hand with the Kriegsmarine in its own backyard. During the continuation war, nearly 60,000 mines were laid in the Baltic by all sides. most between Finland and the Soviet-occupied Estonia, with more being laid between Denmark and Norway. This was in addition to anti-submarine nets and air patrols and blocks. The goal was to hem the Soviet Baltic Fleet in with its surface ships and submarines. The Soviets, of course, had the same idea and laid minefields of their own. Both sides sent their submarines and surface fleets out to hunt for targets despite the mines and air patrols. Both sides paid for it with losses. Eventually, the Soviets pushed the Germans back and were able to send out more and more submarines. One such success for the Soviets was the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustave, probably the greatest maritime loss of life on one ship ever. Finland was forced to sue for peace. Under the terms of the Treaty of said peace, Finland was essentially forced to declare war on Germany. Now it was the Finns and Soviets fighting collapsing Germany. Germany didn't go down without a fight, and they claimed a few Finnish ships, including the aging Louhi, but we'll get to that. Main armament was two 75mm guns in single open mounts, one forward, one aft. About 140 to 150 mines could be carried, depending on the size and type. Propulsion was provided by 3 coal-burning boilers venting to one funnel. These provided steam to one vertical triple expansion engine, which produced 800 horsepower to drive the single propeller for a top speed of 12 knots. On December 1st, 1939, Louhi laid 50 mines along the approaches to Uto and Oro. Later that day, she laid 49 mines near Kokar. From the 3rd to the 5th, she laid 117 mines at Nyhamn and about 40 at Kovak-Lintarna. After reloading, she spent the 9th through the 14th laying a line of 190 mines from Marquette to Sancan. On January 10th and 12th, she returned to Marquette and laid another 140 mines. After mid-January 1940, pretty much everything froze, essentially, but not totally, ending naval operations in the Winter War. Once the continuation war started, thanks in part to the Germans, Finland now had more mines and more mine layers. On June the 22nd, 1941, she laid 100 mines near Nyhamn. The next day, on the 23rd, she laid 30 mines at Kovak-Lintarna. After resupplying on June the 26th, she laid 91 mines near Marquette. After this initial wave, with newer mine layers now operational and Germany doing most of the work, the tired Louhi was essentially retired to act as a submarine tender for Finland's small submarine fleet for the rest of the continuation war. She herself had laid about 1,275 mines during the continuation war. Once the Lapland War started, the Soviets strong-armed Finland into laying even more mines in an effort to push the German Navy back. Louhi was back in service with Soviet supervisors. On June 18, 1944, she laid 60 mines near Lapahoja. On January 12, 1945, Louhi was part of a group laying 160 mines south of Hanko. As the group was heading back home at 12:50, Louhi was apparently hit by a German acoustic passive homing torpedo that blew her stern off, sending her to the bottom in just 2 minutes.